She looked like the kind of passenger nobody remembers. At 33,000 feet above the ground, she sat quietly in seat 12C, eyes down, hands folded near a paperback book. No loud calls. No bricked headphones. No fancy bags. Just a plain backpack under the seat in front of her, like she planned to get up fast if she ever needed to. Around her, the cabin moved in the normal, sleepy rhythm of a short flight. People tapped at their phones. A couple argued in whispers about a missed connection. Someone laughed at a video with the volume too high before quickly turning it down. The air inside the plane had that familiar mix of cold vents, recycled warmth, and coffee that never tastes the way it smells. The woman in 12C didn't join any of it. She read a few lines, paused, and looked out the window like she was counting the clouds. Then she went back to the page. Calm. Almost too calm. She had boarded without drama earlier that afternoon. The airport had been loud and sticky with summer heat, the kind that makes everyone impatient. A delay had rolled across the departure screens in dull yellow letters, and people groaned like it was a personal insult. Families sat on the floor near charging stations. Business travelers stood close to the gates with tight faces, watching the time. No one watched her. She moved through the line smoothly, not rushing, not slow. She held her boarding pass ready before anyone asked. When she reached row 12, she slipped into her seat without needing to check the numbers twice. She placed the backpack under the seat in one clean motion and clicked her seatbelt like she had done it 1,000 times. Then she opened her book to a worn page, already bent at the corner. The passenger beside her, stuck in the middle seat, noticed her for about 3 seconds. She looked normal. That was the whole impression. A quiet traveler, maybe returning from work, maybe going home to family, not someone to worry about. Then the plane climbed higher, leveled out, and the seatbelt sign switched off. A drink cart rolled forward, rattling lightly over the aisle seams. Plastic cups clinked. A flight attendant smiled in a practiced way, offering water, soda, and small snacks that tasted like salt and air. The woman accepted water with a nod. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by engine hum. She kept reading. Time passed. Outside the windows, the sky turned into a wide, blue emptiness. Sunlight flashed on the wing. Far below, the ground looked peaceful and small, like nothing bad could ever reach this height. And then something changed. Started with a feeling, not a sound. A shift in the cabin, like a tiny wave of attention moving from row to row. A few people lifted their heads at the same time, not sure why they were doing it. Then a shadow slid across the window. The passenger in the middle seat turned his head, expecting a cloud. Instead, he saw metal, a fighter jet. So close it looked unreal, like a model held beside the plane for a photo. Gray body, sharp nose, a cockpit that caught the sunlight, and under the wings shapes that did not belong near a civilian flight. His stomach dropped. Across the aisle, someone gasped loudly. A phone slipped from a hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. A child asked a question in a clear, confused voice, and an adult answered too quickly, too softly, like the words didn't matter. More faces pressed toward windows. Another fighter jet appeared on the opposite side, matching speed, holding position like it had been trained to do exactly this. The jets were not circling at a distance. They were locked in, close and steady, like they were guiding the plane, or guarding it, or trapping it. The cabin froze. It was a special kind of silence. Not peace, not calm. The kind of silence that comes when people realize they are not in control anymore. Up front, behind the closed cockpit door, the captain and first officer were speaking in short, careful sentences. Their voices stayed professional, but their eyes kept flicking to the instruments, to the windshield, to the jet pacing them outside. A message had come through the radio, official, firm, and not meant for debate. The plane was being intercepted. There was a concern. Instructions would follow. The words were controlled, but the meaning was sharp enough to cut through training and experience. This flight had become a problem. In the cabin, the flight attendant moved faster now, but tried to look normal. He walked past Rose with a gentle smile that didn't reach his eyes. He leaned close to another crew member and whispered something. Then he looked back toward row 12 like he had been told to confirm something specific. The passenger in the middle seat glanced at the woman beside him. She was no longer reading. Her book was still open, but her eyes were on the window, focused and steady. Not frightened the way the others were frightened. Not confused. More like someone watching a situation unfold that she had trained for, even if she never wanted to see it happen here. The flight attendant stopped near her row. He looked at the seat numbers, then at his small device, then at her face. He hesitated like he wished he could keep walking. The woman lifted her gaze to him, calm as ever. The passenger beside her felt his throat go dry. He didn't know why, but suddenly it felt like the air around seat 12C had changed. A stranger a few rows back leaned into the aisle, eyes locked on the woman, voice trembling. And then, almost like a whisper meant only for her, he said 3 words that made the cabin feel even smaller. "Is that you?" The question did not echo loudly, but it landed heavy. "Is that you?" For a second, it felt like the engines had gone silent, even though they were still roaring steadily outside. The words floated in the tight space between rows, hanging there like something fragile that could break if anyone touched it. The woman in 12C did not jump. She did not look shocked. She slowly turned her head toward the voice. Her eyes were steady, almost curious, like she had been expecting something, just not this exact moment. Most of the passengers had no idea what the question meant. They only knew 2 fighter jets were flying dangerously close to their plane, and now someone was speaking in a tone that sounded like recognition or accusation. The flight attendant cleared his throat and leaned slightly closer to her. His smile had faded now. It was replaced with a tight, professional expression. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "may I see your boarding pass?" His voice was polite, but there was tension underneath. He was following instructions. That much was clear. She closed her book gently, marking her page with 1 finger. Her movements were careful and unhurried. She reached into her pocket, not into her bag, and handed him the folded boarding pass. He checked the name. Then he checked something on his handheld device. Then he looked at her again. The cabin felt smaller by the second. People pretended not to stare, but everyone was staring. A woman across the aisle held her husband's arm tightly. A college student had his phone halfway raised before thinking better of it and lowering it again. Outside, the fighter jets held their positions, perfectly balanced beside the commercial plane. The sunlight reflected off their metal bodies in sharp flashes that made them look almost unreal. In the cockpit, another message came through the radio. Short, direct. The pilot's jaw tightened. The first officer read the updated instructions twice to be sure she heard them correctly. They exchanged a look that said everything without words. Back in row 12, the flight attendant swallowed. "Could you please remain seated and keep your hands visible?" he asked her softly. The request changed the temperature of the cabin. A few passengers gasped quietly. The middle seat passenger beside her shifted slightly away without meaning to. She noticed. She placed both hands calmly on her lap, palms down. Her breathing remained slow and even. If she was afraid, she hid it well. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Her tone was natural, not defensive, not dramatic, just a simple question. The flight attendant hesitated. He wasn't trained for this exact moment. None of them were. "There's a situation being reviewed," he said carefully. "We just need everyone to stay calm." That word, situation, did nothing to calm anyone. A murmur spread through the rows like wind through dry leaves. "What's happening? Why are the jets here? Are we in danger?" The engines hummed on, steady and mechanical, as if the plane itself had no idea anything was wrong. The woman in 12C looked out the window again. She studied the fighter jet beside them. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but in thought. Something was moving behind that calm expression. Calculation, memory, possibilities lining up in her mind. Then she did something that made the middle seat passenger's heart pound. She leaned down slowly toward her backpack. The flight attendant reacted instantly. "Ma'am, please." She froze halfway down and looked up at him again. "My ID is inside." she said evenly. You're going to need it. There was no panic in her voice. No ruse. Just quiet certainty. The flight attendant hesitated for half a second, then nodded. Slowly, he said. She reached under the seat and pulled the backpack into her lap. The zipper sound felt louder than the engines. Every head in nearby rows tilted forward. Inside the cockpit, the captain received another transmission. The words this time were unmistakable. There was a flagged passenger on board. Seat 12C. Possible national security concern. The plane was to prepare for diversion. The captain felt a chill move through his chest. He pressed the intercom button but paused before speaking. He had flown for years. Storms, mechanical issues, medical emergencies. But never this. Back in the cabin, the woman removed a small leather wallet from her bag. She opened it and showed the flight attendant a card. He stared at it longer than necessary. His expression changed. Not fear, not anger, something closer to confusion. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. This says federal clearance, he whispered. She nodded once. Yes, she replied. Another announcement crackled softly through the cockpit speakers. The fighter jets were tightening formation. The diversion airport had been named. Passengers near the windows could see one of the jets slightly adjust its position, wings tilting in precise control. The middle seat passenger felt his pulse in his ears. He looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. He looked at her face. She didn't look like a threat. She looked like someone thinking very fast. Then she said something so quietly that only the flight attendant and the passenger beside her caught it. There's been a mistake. Outside, the jets held steady at 33,000 feet, waiting. Inside, every second felt longer than the last. By the time most passengers understood that this was not a drill, the woman in 12C had already made up her mind. She did not argue. She did not plead. She did not look angry. She looked focused. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom. It was calm, carefully measured, but there was no warmth in it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been instructed to adjust our route due to a security review. There is no immediate danger. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. No immediate danger. That phrase spread through the cabin like smoke. It didn't mean safety. It meant uncertainty. The plane shifted slightly as it changed direction. It was subtle, but people felt it. A gentle bank to the right. The fighter jets adjusted smoothly, staying close, almost protective, almost threatening. The woman in 12C closed her eyes for just a second. Then she opened them and made a decision that surprised everyone. She stood up. Gasps erupted around her. "Ma'am, sit down," someone called from 2 rows back. The flight attendant stepped forward quickly, but she raised one hand. Not in panic, but in reassurance. "I'm not armed," she said clearly, "and I'm not a threat to this aircraft." Her voice was steady enough to cut through the noise. The middle seat passenger felt his heart slam against his ribs. He couldn't decide if she was brave or completely reckless. "I believe the intercept was triggered by a database error," she continued, speaking carefully, choosing each word like it mattered. "If that's the case, diverting this flight will create a larger problem than solving it." The flight attendant looked torn between procedure and instinct. "Please sit down," he repeated, softer now. "We are following instructions." "I understand," she replied, "but I need you to inform the cockpit that I can resolve this." That sentence landed harder than the fighter jets outside. Resolve this? The engines hummed. The cabin lights flickered slightly as the plane adjusted altitude by a few hundred feet. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to remind everyone how high they were. 33,000 feet above the ground. No exits. No control. Only trust. Up front, the first officer was speaking rapidly into her headset. The words confirmed flag, passenger match, and escort protocol floated through the cockpit. The captain rubbed his temple. Something about the situation felt wrong. The manifest showed nothing alarming. No prior alerts. No watch list markers during boarding. Yet here they were, escorted by combat-ready aircraft. Back in row 12, the woman slowly reached into her backpack again. This time, she pulled out something that did not look ordinary. It was not a typical smartphone. It was slightly thicker, matte finish, reinforced edges, a device built to survive more than a drop onto carpet. The passengers closest to her leaned back slightly without realizing it. "It's a secure line," she said quietly to the flight attendant. "I only need 3 minutes." He stared at the device like it might explode. "You can't just." "If this continues," she interrupted gently, "federal agents will board the plane on landing. Every passenger will be questioned. The flight will be grounded for hours. News outlets may pick it up. If this is what I think it is, it can be corrected now." There was no arrogance in her voice, just urgency. The middle seat passenger watched her closely. He noticed something strange. She wasn't afraid of the fighter jets. She was afraid of time. In the cockpit, the captain received another update. The diversion airport was now less than 15 minutes away. Once they descended below a certain altitude, the redirect would become final. He made a decision that went against routine but felt necessary. He pressed the intercom to the cabin crew. "Bring her forward," he said quietly. Back in the aisle, the flight attendant swallowed. "You can speak from the front," he told her. "But you stay visible at all times." She nodded once. "No smile." No drama, just acceptance. As she walked toward the front of the plane, every pair of eyes followed her. Some were frightened, some were angry, some were curious. The middle seat passenger felt something else entirely. Recognition, not of her face, but of the kind of calm that only comes from experience. She had walked through worse places than this cabin. She had made harder calls than this one. At the front of the aircraft, she stopped near the galley, still in view of everyone. She dialed a number from memory. The line connected almost instantly. Her posture straightened. "This is Officer Clearance Level 7, she said, voice controlled and precise. "My identity has been misclassified in active military databases. I am currently on a domestic flight under escort by 2 armed aircraft. Authentication required immediately." Silence filled the space around her. Even the crying child had gone quiet. Outside, one of the fighter jets moved slightly closer, almost aligning with her window. The captain adjusted the radio frequency, listening carefully for incoming confirmation. The woman continued speaking, delivering codes and phrases that sounded meaningless to the average ear but heavy with authority to the right one. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like something else entirely. 33,000 feet above the ground, an ordinary flight had become something nobody would forget. And the outcome now depended on a voice at the other end of a secure line. For 4 minutes, nothing changed. The engines kept their steady roar. The fighter jets stayed locked beside the aircraft. The passengers barely breathed. And she stood near the front galley with the secure phone pressed to her ear, listening. Then her posture shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly straighter, like someone receiving information they had expected, but hoped not to hear. "I understand," she said into the phone. "Yes, that makes sense." Her tone was calm, but her eyes darkened for a second. Something had gone deeper than a simple error. In the cockpit, the captain heard static break across the radio. "Commercial flight, stand by." It was a new voice, not the pilot from before. Sharper, higher authority. The first officer adjusted her headset, fingers tight on the controls. The passengers couldn't hear the full exchange, but they saw the fighter jet on the right dip slightly, then stabilize again. In the aisle, she spoke again into the phone. "The compromised file was uploaded when?" A pause. 2 days ago?" she repeated softly. The words meant nothing to the people watching her, but they meant everything to her. 2 days ago. Her jaw tightened for the first time since takeoff. She had left the country 48 hours earlier. Something had followed her. She turned slightly toward the cockpit, making eye contact with the captain through the open galley doorway. "Tell them to hold position," she said calmly. "Authentication is in progress." The captain hesitated. Then he relayed the message through the radio. Silence followed, the kind of silence that feels like standing on the edge of something. The middle seat passenger felt sweat on his palms. He had never imagined that a normal Thursday flight could turn into this. He looked at her differently now, not like a stranger, not even like a mystery, like a storm standing still. Her voice lowered again into the phone. "You need to clear the hostile flag immediately," she said. "If this aircraft descends below 20,000 feet under escort, this becomes a public incident." She paused, listening carefully. Then, almost under her breath, she added, "And that's exactly what they want." That sentence sent a chill through her. This wasn't random. Someone had fed false data into the system. Someone wanted her exposed, publicly. Outside the window, one of the fighter jets moved closer again. Close enough that passengers could see the pilot's helmet through the canopy. The engines of the smaller aircraft were louder now, cutting through the steady hum of the commercial plane. In the cockpit, the first officer's voice shook slightly. "We're 5 minutes from descent point." The captain nodded slowly. His hand hovered near the radio switch. Then it happened. The radio crackled sharply. "Escort command to commercial flight. Authentication received. Repeat, authentication received. Passenger in seat 12C confirmed cleared. Stand down procedures initiated." The words landed slowly, like heavy rain after tension-filled heat. The captain blinked once, then exhaled deeply. "Confirmed?" he asked into the radio. "Confirmed. Hostile flag removed. You are cleared to resume original route." In the cabin, the woman lowered the phone from her ear. Her face did not show relief the way others expected. "No dramatics ahí." No shaking hands. Just a small nod. Outside, the fighter jet on the right tilted its wings slightly. A subtle gesture. Then both jets peeled away in perfect synchronization, banking hard and climbing upward into the bright sky. Passengers gasped as the gray shapes shrank into distant specks. The sky returned to normal. Blue. Empty. Quiet. Inside the cabin, sound rushed back all at once. Whispering. Nervous laughter. Someone clapping before stopping awkwardly. A child asking if it was over. The captain's voice came through the intercom again, steadier this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, the situation has been resolved. We are continuing to our original destination. There is no further concern." No further concern. But concern had already done its work. The middle seat passenger looked at her as she calmly placed the secure phone back into her backpack. She zipped it closed, returned to her seat, and fastened her belt. Then she picked up her book. Just like that, the man beside her stared. "That's it?" he whispered before he could stop himself. She turned one page slowly. "For now," she replied. Outside, the sky looked ordinary again. But something had changed inside that plane. Everyone knew it. And she knew something else too. The false file had been created intentionally. This wasn't over. It had just moved to the next chapter. By the time the drink cart rolled down the aisle again, people were pretending to be normal. Pretending. Phones came out. Messages were typed fast. "You won't believe what just happened." Some laughed too loudly. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing, replaying the image of gray fighter jets outside their windows. But seat 12C was quiet again. She had reopened her book. Not to hide, to reset. Her breathing was steady. Her shoulders relaxed. On the outside, she looked like any traveler finishing a chapter before landing. On the inside, her mind was moving quickly. 2 days ago, a hostile flag uploaded. Someone had taken her identity and pushed it into military systems as a threat. That required access. That required planning. That required timing. And it had worked. 33,000 feet above the ground, she had almost been publicly exposed. The middle seat passenger glanced at her again. He couldn't understand how she could read after something like that. His hands were still slightly shaky. His heart was only now slowing down. "You knew it would clear," he said quietly, more statement than question. She didn't look at him. "No," she answered honestly. "I knew it had to. That was different." The engines hummed steadily. The aircraft leveled fully back onto its original route. The tension had lifted, but something heavier had taken its place. a quiet awareness that something larger had just brushed past all of them. A flight attendant stopped beside her again, this time softer, less official. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. A small pause. "Thank you for staying calm," he added. Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "It helps," she replied. He nodded and moved on, still shaking his head as if he wasn't sure how to process what he had witnessed. Across the aisle, a teenager whispered, "Was she military?" His friend shrugged. Nobody really knew, and nobody dared ask again. The middle seat passenger leaned back slowly. "What happens now?" he asked under his breath. She closed the book this time and looked straight ahead. "Now," she said quietly, "someone realizes their plan failed." Her eyes shifted briefly toward the window, where the sky was once again peaceful and empty. "But they'll try something else." That sentence sent a chill through him. "You think this was intentional?" he whispered. She didn't answer right away. The cabin lights flickered slightly as the plane hit a small patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign blinked on again with a soft chime. Nothing dramatic, just a reminder of how fragile air travel really is. "Systems don't make mistakes like that by accident," she finally said. He swallowed. "Are we safe?" She looked at him now. "For today," she replied. That was enough to both calm and unsettle him at the same time. The captain came over the intercom again, voice lighter now. "We appreciate your patience. We'll be arriving just slightly behind schedule. Weather at our destination is clear." Clear. The word felt almost ironic. Passengers began settling back into routine. Some ordered drinks they didn't really want. Others stared at their phones, probably checking news apps to see if anything had already leaked. Nothing had. This incident, for now, existed only inside this metal tube in the sky. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes for a moment. Not to rest, to think. Who had access to that database? Who had reason to expose her? Who knew her travel schedule? The list was short, too short. Her fingers tightened slightly against the armrest. She relaxed them immediately. No one needed to see that. The middle seat passenger watched her again. "You don't look scared," he said. She opened her eyes slowly. "Fear is useful," she replied, "but only if you control it." He nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of the words. The drink cart returned one final time before landing. She asked for water again. Simple. Ordinary. The flight attendant handed it to her with a look that carried unspoken respect. When the plane began its descent, the city below came into view. Tiny buildings, thin roads, everything looking calm and harmless from this height. The middle seat passenger stared out the window. "It's strange," he said softly. "Everything down there looks peaceful." She followed his gaze. "It always does from far away," she answered. The landing gear lowered with a heavy mechanical sound. The plane shook gently as it cut through thicker air. The runway rushed up to meet them. For everyone else, the story was ending. For her, it was beginning. As the wheels touched the ground and the cabin erupted in relieved applause, she already knew this was not just an error-corrected midair. It was a message, and someone somewhere was waiting to see how she would respond. When the wheels hit the runway, the sound was louder than usual. Not because the landing was rough, but because everyone inside that plane needed it to mean something. The applause started in the back and rolled forward in uneven waves. Nervous laughter followed. A few people wiped their eyes quietly, pretending it was just dry cabin air. Seatbelt signs chimed off. Life somehow returned to normal speed. Overhead bins popped open. Bags were pulled down. Phones came back out. Messages were sent fast. Some dramatic, some exaggerated, some already turning the event into a story that would grow bigger by the hour. But she did not stand immediately. She stayed seated in 12C, hands resting lightly on her backpack. Eyes focused ahead as if she were waiting for a signal only she understood. The middle seat passenger hesitated before speaking. "You're not in a hurry?" he asked. She shook her head once. "People who rush draw attention," she said quietly. He almost smiled at that. After fighter jets and military radio calls, worrying about attention felt almost absurd. But she meant it. 3 rows ahead, someone whispered, "That's her." As if she couldn't hear. She heard. She always heard. The line in the aisle grew tighter as passengers shuffled forward. The usual impatience was softer now, replaced by curiosity. A few people glanced back toward row 12, hoping for one more clue about who she really was. She finally stood. No dramatic movement. No heavy sigh. She lifted her backpack onto one shoulder and stepped into the aisle like she had done it 100 times before. The middle seat passenger stepped aside slightly to let her pass first. He wasn't sure why. Respect, maybe, or instinct. As she moved toward the front, the flight attendant who had spoken to her earlier caught her eye. "Take care," he said. "You too," she replied. 2 simple words, but they carried more meaning than anyone else realized. When she stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, the noise shifted. The engine hum disappeared. The bright airport lights replaced cabin shadows. Ordinary sounds returned. Rolling suitcases, distant announcements, the smell of coffee from a nearby cafe. It was almost unbelievable that 30 minutes earlier, 2 fighter jets had been locked onto this aircraft in midair. The middle seat passenger followed behind her at a distance, still trying to process everything. He wanted to ask more. He wanted answers. But some part of him knew he wouldn't get them. At the end of the jet bridge, something unusual caught his eye. 2 people stood near the wall. They weren't holding signs. They weren't wearing uniforms. But they were watching, calm, alert. And when she stepped into the terminal, their posture shifted almost imperceptibly. She didn't stop walking. She didn't greet them. She simply adjusted her pace slightly so they could fall into step beside her without making it obvious. To anyone else, it looked like strangers heading in the same direction. To someone paying attention, it looked coordinated. The middle seat passenger slowed down. This was bigger than he thought. She reached the terminal exit doors. The late afternoon light poured in through the glass. Outside, taxis lined up. People hugged family members. Life moved on. One of the 2 waiting individuals leaned closer to her and spoke quietly. "Full debrief tonight," he said under his breath. She nodded. "No media leak?" she asked. "Contained," he replied. She exhaled slowly, not relief, just confirmation. Then she stopped walking for the first time. Not dramatically, just enough to turn slightly toward him. "2 days ago," she said softly. "That's when the file was uploaded." He froze for half a second. "You're sure?" "Yes." The air between them changed. Because that meant this wasn't random. It meant someone inside the system had helped. She adjusted the strap of her backpack again. "Find the entry point," she said. Quietly. He nodded. The middle seat passenger stood frozen near the sliding doors, watching from a distance. He couldn't hear everything. Just fragments. Just enough to know that the story hadn't ended on that runway. She stepped out into the evening air without looking back. No dramatic farewell. No final speech. Just another traveler disappearing into a busy airport. Invisible again. The middle seat passenger stood there a moment longer, holding his carry-on bag, trying to understand what he had witnessed. 33,000 feet above the ground. She had stood in the aisle with fighter jets locked onto their plane. Now she walked into the city like it was any other day. He realized something then. The jets weren't the real story. The real story was how calm she had been when everything could have gone wrong. And somewhere, someone had tried to force that moment to happen. Which meant this wasn't just a mistake corrected midair. It was a warning, and she had heard it clearly. That night, the city lights looked ordinary. Traffic moved. Restaurants filled. Airplanes continued to take off and land as if nothing unusual had happened that afternoon. News channels ran their regular stories. Social media buzzed about small dramas and trending topics. No headlines mentioned a commercial flight escorted by fighter jets. No alerts mentioned Seat 12C. It was contained. Exactly as promised. She sat in the back seat of a quiet car moving through evening traffic, watching reflections of streetlights slide across the window. Her backpack rested on her lap, one hand lightly on top of it. Not protective, just aware. Across from her, One of the same calm figures from the airport reviewed something on a tablet. The entry point was masked, he said quietly. It was routed through multiple systems. Someone knew what they were doing. She didn't look surprised. They wanted it to trigger publicly, she replied. In the air. Visible. He nodded. If authentication hadn't gone through in time, it would have forced a landing, she finished. Media. Questions. Exposure. Silence settled between them. Outside, the city felt peaceful. Inside the car, the truth felt heavier. She leaned her head back briefly and closed her eyes, not from exhaustion, but to replay the timing in her mind. 2 days ago, the upload. 48 hours later, the intercept. Someone had calculated her schedule perfectly. That meant her movements were being watched. When the car stopped in front of a quiet building with dark windows, she stepped out without hesitation. Inside, the atmosphere shifted immediately. No declarations. No chatter. Just low lighting and focused faces. A small team waited in a conference room. Screens displayed timestamps, digital logs, fragments of code. She placed her backpack down and sat. Walk us through it, someone said. She did. Clear. Precise. No emotion added. Every minute accounted for. Every word from the fighter pilot repeated exactly as heard. When she described standing in the aisle at 33,000 feet with armed aircraft on both sides, no one reacted dramatically. They understood. One of the analysts leaned forward. The hostile flag was meant to stick, he said. It was layered deep enough that, without direct authentication, it wouldn't clear. She nodded slowly. They underestimated response time. A faint smile passed across someone's face. Or they overestimated our hesitation. Hours passed quietly. No raised voices. No panique. Just methodical work. Near midnight, she stepped outside alone for air. The cool night breeze carried the distant sound of traffic and faint music from somewhere down the block. She looked up at the sky. Earlier that day, it had held 2 fighter jets and a plane full of frightened passengers. Now it held nothing but stars. Her phone vibrated once. A secure message. Entry trace located. Internal assist suspected. She read it twice. Internal. That meant the threat was closer than she thought. For a moment, something almost like frustration flickered across her face. Not fear. Not anger. Focus sharpening. Inside the plane that afternoon, she had remained calm because the crisis was visible. Clear. This was different. This was quiet. The next morning, passengers from that flight would tell their families about the jets. Some would exaggerate. Some would laugh it off. Some would insist they saw her speaking in codes like in a movie. But none of them would know the deeper truth. The fighter jets were not the beginning. They were the test. Back in her small apartment later that night, she placed the paperback novel on the table. The page she had finished midair still slightly bent. She stared at it for a long second. Invisible, forgettable, unnoticed, that had always been the goal. And it still was. She turned off the lights and stood near the window, watching the quiet street below. Somewhere, someone believed they had made their move. Somewhere, someone was waiting to see if she would retreat. Instead, she reached for her laptop, because tomorrow the investigation would turn outward. And this time, she would be the one watching. 33,000 feet above the ground, they had tried to expose her. Now she would find out who had tried. The sky had returned to normal. But the game had just begun.